Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into today's case, if you're dedicated to uncovering the truth behind the headlines, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a verified true crime story. Now let's get into it. The year is 2023. In a quiet, close-knit neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, life moves at a familiar pace. Families know each other by name, wave as they pass by, and gather for weekend barbecues. It's the kind of place where everyone feels safe. Among these families lived 39-year-old Rene Mendez, his girlfriend, 37-year-old Sylvia Ramos, and her 19-year-old daughter, Brianna. To anyone looking in, they seemed like a typical blended family. Rene was known as a quiet and polite man, someone who mostly kept to himself but was always respectful. Sylvia was friendly, hardworking, and known by her neighbors as a deeply caring mother who would do anything for her daughter. But the picture-perfect image they presented to the world was a carefully constructed illusion. As investigators would soon discover, what was happening behind the closed doors of their modest home was far from harmonious. The relationship between Rene and Sylvia had curdled into something toxic. Friends started noticing subtle but concerning changes in Sylvia. Her once vibrant personality began to dim. She started skipping social gatherings. Her phone would ring unanswered for days, and she deflected any questions about her personal life. For those who knew her best, it was painfully clear she was living under immense emotional strain. At the local grocery store where she worked, Sylvia's colleagues remembered her as a kind and dedicated employee. She spoke often of Brianna, who was her absolute pride and joy. Brianna had just graduated from high school and was excited about her plans to attend community college. She was a bright, outspoken young woman and fiercely protective of her mother. But this protectiveness was causing growing friction between her and Rene. She had begun to confront him about the way he treated Sylvia, especially after witnessing arguments that ended with slammed doors and explosive, raised voices. Court records would later paint a darker picture of Rene Mendez, revealing a history of controlling behavior and intense jealousy. He couldn't stand Sylvia talking to other men, even in the most casual, innocent conversations. He would interrogate her about her whereabouts and demand to see who she was texting. In the beginning, Sylvia brushed it off as simple insecurity, a sign that he cared. But as the months wore on, his verbal attacks grew more frequent and more aggressive. In January 2023, one of Sylvia's close friends received a chilling message. In it, Sylvia confessed she felt trapped and afraid. But she couldn't bring herself to leave, still clinging to the hope that Rene could change. Like so many others in her position, she was caught in a heartbreaking cycle of fear and false hope. Brianna, however, was done waiting. She had confided in her friends that she was making plans to move out and take her mother with her if things did and improve, and soon. By February, the arguments had become so common that neighbors started to take notice. One neighbor recalled hearing Sylvia cry out late one night, followed by an abrupt, unnerving silence. When asked about it later, Sylvia just said it was a misunderstanding. But for anyone paying attention, the warning signs of danger were flashing red. As March arrived, the tension inside the Ramos home had reached a critical boiling point. Friends described Sylvia as distant and perpetually nervous. At work, she was distracted, her smile forced. She mentioned to a coworker that she wanted to end the relationship, but was terrified of how Rene would react. She had been planning a trip to visit her sister in San Antonio later that month, a desperate attempt to get some space and clear her head. Rene, meanwhile, was spiraling. His possessiveness had become an obsession. He started secretly checking Sylvia's phone, convinced she was being unfaithful. Investigators later found a string of text messages where he relentlessly demanded to know who she was talking to and where she was going. Sylvia's responses were always calm and patient, trying to de-escalate, but her patience only seemed to inflame his rage. On March 4th, just 2 days before the tragedy, Sylvia confided in a neighbor that she was genuinely afraid of Rene's temper. She told her that he had thrown her phone against a wall during their last fight before storming out of the house. She also mentioned something that sent a shiver down the neighbor's spine. Brianna had started locking her bedroom door at night. That final weekend, an eerie quiet settled over the house. Neighbors saw Rene and Sylvia leave for the grocery store, but they walked in silence, no smiles, no laughter. Brianna spent most of her time in her room, messaging friends online. In one of those messages, later recovered by police, she wrote something that would become a haunting premonition. He has been acting weird all week. I think Mom wants to leave him, and he knows. What exactly transpired over the next 48 hours would turn that creeping sense of dread into an unimaginable nightmare. On the morning of Monday, March 6, 2023, Sylvia went to work as she always did. Her coworkers noticed she looked tired, but she seemed to be in better spirits than she had been the week before. She told one of them that she was planning to talk to Rene that evening, that she was going to end things peacefully. She clocked out around 5:30 p.m. and headed home. That night, around 9 p.m., neighbors heard the familiar, muffled sound of arguing. At first, no one gave it a second thought. Fights were nothing new at that house. But around 10 p.m., as one neighbor later told police, the argument suddenly escalated. It grew louder, more frantic, and was punctuated by a loud, heavy thud and the sharp sound of shattering glass. And then, complete silence. Unbeknownst to anyone outside, a catastrophic chain of events had been set in motion, one that would brutally extinguish 2 lives before the clock struck midnight. As darkness fell over Dallas, no one could have possibly imagined the horror unfolding inside that small home, a home that, by sunrise, would be the center of a murder investigation that would shock the state of Texas and leave an entire community asking how such a tragedy could happen in plain sight. As the police investigation would later reveal, every sign had been there. Every warning, every cry for help, missed or tragically ignored. And before the night was over, one man's rage would utterly destroy everything. In San Antonio, Texas, a chilling silence settled over a quiet suburban home. It was the kind of silence that feels wrong, the kind that makes your stomach drop. Sylvia Ramos and her young daughter Brianna had vanished. Family members grew frantic after their calls and texts went unanswered for hours. They knew Sylvia was a devoted mother who was always reachable, especially when it came to her daughter. Something was terribly wrong. When relatives arrived at Sylvia's house, their worst fears began to take shape. The family car was still parked in the driveway, a silent testament that they should have been home. But the house was dark and eerily quiet. No one answered the door. A deep sense of dread prompted them to call 911, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst. When officers from the Bexar County Sheriff's Office arrived to conduct a welfare check, it didn't take long for them to realize this wasn't just a case of 2 people not answering their phones. This was something far more sinister. Within hours, yellow tape cordoned off the property, transforming a family home into a crime scene. The investigation kicked into high gear immediately. Detectives started by building a timeline, talking to anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual. Neighbors recalled hearing raised voices late the previous night, a heated argument that cut through the quiet of the neighborhood. But in the darkness, they couldn't see who was involved. One crucial detail emerged. A neighbor remembered seeing a familiar vehicle parked outside Sylvia's house, the car belonging to her partner, Rene Mendez. They saw the car, but strangely, no one saw him leave. Inside the house, investigators began to piece together a story of chaos. The scene suggested a sudden, violent struggle. But there were other, more subtle clues that caught their attention, inconsistencies that hinted at a staged or altered scene. It was as if someone had tried to clean up, to erase what had happened. But the evidence of a terrible event lingered. While forensics teams carefully collected every fiber and fingerprint, other detectives focused on the people in Sylvia and Brianna's lives, and one name was at the top of their list, Rene Mendez. When detectives first contacted Mendez, he claimed to have no idea where Sylvia and Brianna were. He sounded calm, almost unconcerned, and offered a timeline of his movements that seemed plausible at first glance. But detectives are trained to spot inconsistencies, and his story didn't quite add up with the preliminary information they had gathered. The small discrepancies were like tiny cracks in a carefully constructed facade. Investigators knew they needed more than just a gut feeling, so they started digging deeper, looking for something concrete to either confirm or refute his story. The first major break came from an unexpected source, the silent eyes of technology. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, collecting surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses. It was a tedious process, sifting through hours of low-resolution video. But their persistence paid off. One camera captured a clear shot of Rene Mendez's car leaving the area in the middle of the night, directly contradicting his claim that he hadn't been there. The lie was exposed. His calm denial now looked like a calculated deception. With this new evidence, the Bihar County Sheriff's Office officially named Rene Mendez a person of interest. The case was rapidly gaining momentum. Armed with the contradictory surveillance footage and his suspicious statements, investigators secured a warrant for his arrest. They needed to get him into an interrogation room to confront him with the evidence and see how his story held up under pressure. When they brought him in for questioning, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Detectives observed his body language, his tone of voice, the way his eyes darted around the room. Every inconsistent answer, every moment of hesitation, only deepened their suspicion that he was hiding a dark secret. Meanwhile, the forensic lab was a hive of activity. Analysts worked around the clock, knowing that the key to justice for Sylvia and Brianna lay hidden in the microscopic details. They analyzed DNA samples, combed through digital data from cell phones, and synchronized the security camera footage. Slowly but surely, they were reconstructing the final, terrifying hours of Sylvia and Brianna's lives. The digital breadcrumbs left behind on their phones and the physical evidence from the scene were beginning to paint a very clear and very grim picture. As investigators dug into the couple's background, a pattern of escalating conflict emerged. Friends and family told detectives that the relationship between Sylvia and Rene had been strained for weeks. Arguments over money and issues of trust had become more frequent and more intense. Sylvia had confided in some of her closest friends that she was considering leaving him for good. She was making plans to move out, to start a new life with her daughter, free from the constant tension. This revelation provided a potential motive. There were no signs of forced entry at the house, which strongly suggested that the person responsible was someone Sylvia knew and trusted, someone who had easy access to her home. The manhunt for Rene Mendez intensified. Investigators tracked his digital footprint, following leads to locate him. The break they needed came when they traced him to a friend's residence. A tactical team moved in, taking him by surprise. He was brought back to the station for a final, formal interrogation. This time, the detectives didn't hold back. They laid out all the evidence they had compiled. The phone records that placed him at the scene, the camera footage of his car, the physical evidence from the house, and the inconsistencies in his own story. Faced with this mountain of irrefutable proof, Mendez's calm demeanor finally shattered. The cool, composed man who had initially denied everything was gone, replaced by someone visibly nervous and cornered. The carefully built wall of lies came crumbling down. Shortly after this interrogation, the Bihar County Sheriff's Office made a public announcement that shook the community to its core. Rene Mendez was in custody, charged in connection with the deaths of Sylvia Ramos and her daughter, Brianna. The news sent shockwaves through San Antonio. Friends and neighbors were stunned. They remembered Sylvia and Brianna as a kind, close-knit pair. They struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet family next door with the horrific crime that had taken place behind closed doors. The case now moved to the legal system, where prosecutors began preparing for what would become one of the most heart-wrenching and closely watched trials in recent Texas history. The family, consumed by grief, braced themselves for a long fight for justice. Months after his arrest, Rene Mendez stood before a Texas court to face justice. The courtroom was packed, filled with family members, journalists, and local residents who had followed this heartbreaking story from the very beginning. For everyone present, this wasn't just another legal process. It was a long-awaited moment of truth and a chance for closure. The prosecution laid out a powerful case, built piece by piece with a mountain of evidence. They had everything: physical proof, digital records, and compelling witness statements that painted a clear, undeniable picture. Phone data was crucial, creating a precise timeline of the tragic night. Surveillance footage from various locations confirmed Mendez's movements, tracking him step by step. Meanwhile, forensic analysis definitively linked several key pieces of evidence from the home directly to him. In court, investigators walked the jury through their meticulous process. They explained how they had reconstructed the entire sequence of events using a combination of cutting-edge technology, extensive interviews, and classic on-the-ground detective work. The digital trail was especially damning. From cell tower pings that placed him at the scene to his message history, The data left no room for doubt about his involvement. One by one, friends of Sylvia Ramos took the stand, their voices often breaking with emotion. They recalled conversations with Sylvia, who had recently told them she was planning to end her relationship with Mendez. They described her as a deeply caring mother and a hard-working woman, completely devoted to her daughter, Brianna, who was just starting to build her own adult life. Their testimony brought the victims to life, reminding everyone of the two vibrant people who were lost. The defense team tried to argue for a lesser charge. They claimed the horrific act wasn't premeditated, suggesting it was a spontaneous event. But the jury remained laser-focused on the facts presented by the investigators. The evidence was just too consistent, too clear. It spoke for itself, and its message was loud and unwavering. Throughout the trial, the courtroom was a pressure cooker of raw emotion. Family members clutched each other's hands, their lips moving in silent prayers for justice. The judge skillfully maintained order as each witness took their turn, recounting what they knew and saw. The collective testimonies painted a tragic portrait of a relationship that had slowly crumbled under pressure, ultimately leading to one catastrophic night that shattered so many lives forever. After days of intense testimony, painstaking deliberation, and deeply emotional closing arguments, the jury finally returned. The air in the courtroom grew heavy as they filed back into the jury box. The verdict was reached. Rene Mendez was found guilty on all counts. The judge then delivered the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that ensured he would never be a free man again. As the judge's words echoed through the room, a profound silence fell over the gallery. It was the sound of a community holding its breath. Some people began to weep quietly, tears of grief and relief mingling together. Others simply bowed their heads, the weight of the moment finally settling in. For the loved ones of Sylvia and Brianna, justice had finally been served. It was a somber victory, because no verdict, no sentence, could ever erase the immeasurable pain of their loss. But it was justice nonetheless. Outside the courthouse, the district attorney stepped up to a bank of microphones to address the reporters. He stressed the critical importance of community awareness and early intervention in cases involving domestic conflict. He extended his heartfelt thanks to the law enforcement officers and forensic teams, praising their precision, their dedication, and their unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. This case sent a powerful message across Texas and beyond, that every single life matters, and that justice, even when it feels slow or delayed, will ultimately prevail. The story of Sylvia Ramos and her daughter Brianna is so much more than just a tragic headline. It's a powerful reminder of human resilience, of the families who find the strength to stand together in the face of unimaginable grief, and of the dedicated investigators who devote their lives to finding the truth, no matter how complex or hidden it may be. Today, the memory of Sylvia and Brianna lives on. It serves as a symbol of the strength found in seeking justice and underscores the vital importance of protecting the most vulnerable among us. If this story has moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others to help spread awareness. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime documentaries, told with truth, integrity, and the utmost respect for the victims. Every subscription helps us continue to create these fact-checked stories that remind the world why justice is so important. Stay safe, stay aware, and thank you for watching.